Welcome to the SDA Housing Podcast, brought to you by NDIS Property Australia. Before starting this episode, we need to provide a general disclaimer. Information contained in this podcast is general in nature only. It does not take into account the objectives, financial situation, or needs of any particular person. You need to consider your financial situation and needs before making any decisions based on the information in this podcast. And you should consider seeking independent and professional advice for your personal circumstances. All right, let's begin.
Hello everybody, my name is Minh and I'm your host for today from NDIS Property Australia, and you're listening to the SDA Housing Podcast, a show that explains, highlights, guides and brings awareness about all things SDA in this ever-changing NDIS world. Today we have two special guest speakers, Matt Garmony from Garmony Property Consultants. Hello Matt.
How you going, Minh?
And we have a repeat speaker, Angad Singh from the Perth Property Developers Group. Is that right?
That's right, Minh. Thanks very much.
Great. Today we're talking about valuations, valuer, and all the things between those two topics. So Matt, tell us all about who you are and what you guys do as a valuer for NDIS SDA properties.
Yes, thanks, Minh. We've been valuing properties in Perth, or our company, since about 1984, so we've been around for a long time. Our company looks at residential, commercial and specialist property types, of which NDIS properties would fall into the specialist property category. NDIS properties are fairly new to Western Australia. They've been on the east coast of Australia for a long time, but they're fairly infant in their process over here in WA.
Gotcha. So Matt, when did your business get into the SDA valuations side of things? In the last, when did you begin? Yeah,
we've probably doing these for the last 18 months, 2 years, and they're ever increasing in the number of valuations that we're getting from various financiers.
So just to give us a bit of a understanding as to how much volume you've done in the last 18 months, Matt, have you done a lot, or has it slowly been building up slowly, or is it like bang, a lot of it from the very start? Yeah.
It started off slowly. As I said, it wasn't very well known over here in WA, and a lot of the banks were a bit cautious about lending on SDA and NDIS properties. But over the last probably 6 months, we've seen an ever-increasing number of instructions through from financiers for generally house and land packages of NDIS properties.
And the financiers, are they bank or non-bank lenders you're seeing?
They're generally they're not the first tier bank lenders. They're generally second or third or non-bank lenders. Mm-hmm. The main bank's appetite for this type of product isn't as strong.
Gotcha. And what kind of questions do you have in your mind about talking to Matt here today?
Yeah, listen. So what we do is we develop and sell SDA products, both health and land packages, and on the odd occasion, completed product as well. We work with investors and developers to do that, and we are very, very interested to understand how the magic number of the valuation kind of comes together and what the process is, I guess. So sometimes we see numbers that make sense. Sometimes we see numbers that we just have no idea how people arrive at that type of valuation. So Matt, maybe from you, what I'd love to hear is help us understand the process. What does it look like when you get a request through? What sort of instructions are you given from lenders? What sort of documents are you provided by the lenders? And how do you start actually working through to come to a number?
And Matt, before you go into the answer for that question, can you maybe compare a normal valuation process for a 4-bedroom, 2-bathroom house in one street, and in the same street, a 4-bed, 4-bath in this house?
Sure.
The two differences between the two?
Well, obviously the product is different. Got extra couple of bathrooms, and the construction costs for any NDIS property is a lot more expensive than a standard residential home. When we're doing a valuation on a residential home, we're comparing to other homes that may have sold in the street or in surrounding locations. Generally, they're of a similar age, similar size, have a similar number of bedrooms or bathrooms, and conditions. So we're looking at all these different factors, basically trying to put ourselves in the position of what a prudent purchaser would be looking for. And often these purchasers, particularly in the type of market we're in at the moment, where there's a lack of supply and strong demand, the purchasers may have missed out on a property around the corner and know exactly what that's sold for, and they're willing to pay market values or even slightly more for the one that they're looking at, so they don't miss out on that. With an NDIS property, there's a lot more that goes into the valuation side of things. It's a specialised property asset. It generates a significantly higher income than a standard residential home, but there is more risk involved. So the return on investment is generally higher. The higher the risk, the higher the return.
And what sort of, I guess when you start, so are you given like a pack or an address with some documents to go ahead and value? How do you start that process?
So generally what we're provided with, or what we request, is obviously an instruction letter from the bank or the client. If we're doing a house and land package valuation, we'll need a copy of the land sales contract, copy of the proposed building plans, copy of the specifications that relate to the proposed building, and a copy of the building contract.
Do you see, how similar do you see the range of, I guess, specifications and building contracts across different house and land packages? Do you see that they're all quite similar, or they're different, or are people using quite different inclusions at quite different levels?
A lot of the valuations we've done have been for the high physical support type property. So the level of finish and specifications are relatively similar. There are some differences, and there might be a difference in the quality of finish, or a difference in the layout of the house and the configuration, which I understand helps with the efficiency of living in an NDIS property.
Yeah, for sure.
Matt, have you done any valuations on non-HPS housing, like the robust or the improved livability design homes at all yet?
I don't think we have. I think they have all been designed for a high physical support, which to me would be prudent because it gives you the opportunity to achieve a higher rental based on the NDIS contribution.
True, but obviously with higher costs means higher risk and higher, well, it costs more to build the highest level of category design house for NDIS house, obviously, yeah.
That's correct, but I think the layout of a high physical support compared to a lesser classification, it still have similar layouts in terms of the en-suites will be a bit larger, and so you're still providing more of a specialised property compared to a non-NDIS property.
Of course, yeah, of course. Speaking of your experience so far, have you come across any unique, wonderfully designed, great finishes that stands out in your mind that you would give us a bit of feedback on what you liked to see?
Look, some of the developers have been designing the properties so that they could be retrofitted back to more of a standard home in an instance where an NDIS property is no longer required in that location. So a lot of the banks are requesting, when we do the valuations, what's the value as an NDIS property, but what's also the alternative use value. So again, if NDIS isn't the highest and best use for the property at that time, what would someone pay for the property and potentially convert it back to more of a standard home? So we've had discussions with some of the builders that if they can design it in a way where they can easily convert it back to more of a conventional design, then that would potentially provide a better value long term.
Are you talking adaptable design?
Adaptable design, yes. So you might have one of the bedrooms that could be converted to a games room or a second living area, because in my experience, the NDIS design is more about the bedrooms and the en suites, and then generally there's a smaller kitchen and family meals area, which is probably not as desirable for a standard family home.
Yeah. So tell us then, how do you come to a number for what the property is worth as an NDIS property? And what are the moving parts to that valuation?
So one of the main factors is, people are buying these properties for their return. A standard residential house return in WA generally ranges between 3 or 4% of the rental income. With an NDIS property, because it is specialised and in terms of its construction, and also there's a narrower market, there's more risk involved. So the return is a lot higher. So we look at what is the rental tension for the property, and it might be based on a 2-participant plus an overnight carer, or a 3-participant plus an overnight carer. And depending on the number of participants will depend on what sort of rental income it can generate. So we work out, based on the design, what the potential rental will be, and then we deduct the costs of the house. So you've got the general rates, taxes, insurance, but then there's also gardening and some maintenance. And because it's a specialised property and the participants, there's a narrow market for that, we expect that there's a higher vacancy period. So we'd factor in a vacancy rate, and then the property management side of things is probably going to be a little bit higher than a standard residential home. And so we work back to what we call a net rental. So what money is in the owner's pocket at the end of the day, and then recapitalise that at a yield based on comparable sales evidence. In Western Australia at the moment, the returns for NDIS properties have been ranging between 9 and 10% of the net rental value. Well, and then we capitalise the net rent at that amount, and that comes up with what an investor would be able to achieve or afford to pay for the property based on that 9 to 10% return.
Yeah. So let's just recap that. So you take the gross yield of the property, which you'll establish, I guess, through the NDIS calculator, and you plug in the area data and whether it's got fire sprinklers and the property category. You'll come to a gross valuation, a gross rental valuation. You would then deduct property management and any other holding costs such as rates, taxes, maintenance, compliance costs. And then at the end of that, you would compare that net rent with other properties that you have seen transact. And where it seems to fall is that investors are purchasing these at about a 9 to 10% net yield. Have I summarised that correctly?
Net rental. Yes.
Net rental, yeah.
So that's what the market is showing at the moment, based on the evidence that we've collated over the last 12 to 18 months.
Yeah, sure. And when you do an alternative use valuation, how does that methodology differ from what you've described?
So what we would look at there is probably more along the lines of, if someone was to build a conventional 4-bedroom, 2-bathroom home, let's say next door, the land value should be similar, given if it's a similar land size, and then what it would cost to build a conventional 4-bedroom home. So that's one way to look at it. So land plus your building cost. Mm-hmm. And then the other way is to compare other modern 4-bedroom, 2-bathroom homes in the surrounding locality. So that's a direct comparison approach.
Sure.
Quite often those amounts will be less than the NDIS and SDA value because they're not getting the same rental return.
Yeah, we're seeing, and this is what I'd like to, I guess, hear your feedback on. So with the summation method that you've described, where you'll take the build cost plus the land value, that'll give you a number, or you'll compare it to other properties that are already built and finished, say 3x2s or 4x2s in the location. How much daylight are you seeing between the SDA valuation and the alternative best use valuation?
Just looking at, thinking back to a couple that we've valued recently, the NDIS value for a 2 or 3 high physical support participant might have been in the order of $850,000, and the alternative use value came in around about the $650,000.
Yeah, wow.
So there's about a $200,000 difference.
Yeah,
from that particular.
So just to summarise, you get a contract for $900,000, for example, $900,000 round number. You value it at $850,000 next number, and then the alternative use valuation is $650,000, as you say. There's 3 numbers in front of it. That gets sent to the financier, $900,000, $850,000, $650,000. Well, then what happens from that moment onwards with the bank's valuation finalisation? What happens then?
How do they pick what number to use?
Well, that's probably more of a question for one of the financiers.
Yeah.
So would they say, well, we received the valuation, we determine the valuation is this number, so that they will decide between that alternative use number and your valuation number as to what the bank assesses is the true valuation on this transaction. Does that have the next steps there?
Look, my thoughts on that would be that depending on what the financier's loan-to-value ratios and and serviceability and all that sort of thing will depend on, they might look at a lower loan-to-value ratio based on the NDIS value, and they might look at more of a conventional loan-to-value ratio for a residential property based on the alternative use value. So I think they would probably look at both, but as I said, that's probably more of a question for
So each lender, it sounds like, would have a policy around which valuation they use, and then they would have an LVR, servicing requirements, etc., that are attached to that particular valuation. So they may offer, for example, an 80% LVR on an alternative use valuation, or maybe a 60% LVR on an SDA valuation. And depending on the lender, they'll decide that internally, right?
That's what my assumption.
Yeah. I want to ask you both a question. This is from my experience over 2.5 years. When I started doing SDA 2.5 years ago, it was normal to see $200,000-$300,000 shortfall valuations, and clients were still proceeding. That was normal. So it was in the marketplace. It was normal to be told from someone, when you sell this, you'll be $200,000 short. And yep, understand that. Okay, that was 2.5 years ago. Then a year and a half ago, yes, it'll be valuation on the dollar. Okay. The last 9, 10, 11 months, it's become now, because of the build prices and land prices going up so high, the shortfalls are back down to about $80,000 to $100,000 shortfall now. So, thoughts on that?
I think you nailed it. Build costs in WA, master builders reported that there was a 31% increase in construction costs from, June to June last year, and the income hasn't changed.
So,
or that much anyway.
If there was no price increases of labour and supply, then in theory, we still be seeing valuation on the dollar on the contracts. In theory.
Well, I think what's happened is that the cost that we're selling these packages has escalated.
Mm-hmm, yes.
It's not that the valuation, which is linked to the income, hasn't changed, but the cost, these houses that if you just rewind, what were we building a house and land package for, traditional housing, in December of 2020? For a single story, that might have been $1,000, maybe $1,100 a metre finished. What's today's rate on a single story construction? Maybe $1,800, maybe 50 to 60.
On normal,
on a normal house, on an SDA probably is closer to that mark.
Yeah.
But just to think about that means that a house that we were selling for $300,000, we would be selling the same house today for $450,000. That increase in cost, the income hasn't gone up in SDA to reflect the same. Would you say that's got something to do with it?
Look, I think building costs have probably played a big part in that. But I would expect that the knowledge of SDA, and particularly in Western Australia, has improved.
Yeah,
there's more evidence available now, whereas 2 years ago there was basically no transactions. So that from a valuation perspective, we would need to compare try and compare like with like. And since we've been involved, we've looked at, a way to assess it more on a commercial type property. So we're looking at the rental return and then the rental income and looking at what sort of return people would be willing to achieve. We've made comparisons to medical centres and other commercial properties that have a narrower market and they have a bit more risk because tenants are harder to get than a conventional residential home. So the 9 to 10% is probably a little bit above commercial property yields, but that also is probably reflective of the narrower market in terms of participants and also the specialised nature of the property.
For sure. And I guess, Matt, you would see this a lot. Like we just touched on, for example, build costs. You would do a lot of, I guess, traditional house and land package valuations as well. Do you guys still do that in your firm?
Yeah, we do a little bit. Yeah. Yes.
What are you seeing for, let's just isolate it to single story constructions. I mean, these things are probably 200, 250 square meters in size. What are you seeing as a typical value of a home that is of that size in both an SDA category and a traditional category? Because this will need to be factored into your alternative use. You might see a construction cost of a 200 odd square meter home sitting around the 650, 680 mark kind of thing for a HPS product. That product, if it was a traditional home, would probably be in the range of 480 or something.
It's probably a third of the value, at least a third lower for a conventional.
Yeah, sure.
And that's probably comes down to different fire doors, additional bathrooms, additional width and layouts, and other things that are required to make the various classifications. So
you're saying that it's about, so just to be clear, what you're saying is that for if you were to purchase a single story, 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom house, that would cost around 400,000.
Let's say it's $2,000.
Yeah, $2,000 a meter, 400,000. You would expect an SDA product of a similar size to be around 600,000.
So about 3,000.
About 3,000 a meter, right? So a 50% increase from traditional residential. That's what you're seeing based on all your I guess your experience?
Yes.
Yeah. And honestly, guys, like if you're looking at the costs of SDAs and you're a builder like we are, or you're a developer, or you're seeing what these things are selling for, that is mind blowing. It punches you in the gut when you realize how much extra cost that they are in these things. And I suspect that a lot of the ones that you're seeing are still class 1s. So not with the class 3 upgrades such as fire sprinklers and many of those other things, which will probably you'll start to see more of soon.
Yes, and most of them, they're class 1, but they've been sort of classified as high physical support. May change in the future.
Yeah, interesting.
Can I ask you a question, Matt? Let's compare apples and a pear. Right? We have a 205 square meter HPS, 3-bedroom, 3-bathroom, 1-car HPS house, class 1, call it that. And it'll be 2 tenants.
Yes.
You have a 4-bedroom, 4-bathroom, 2-car, 270 square meter house, so 65 square meters bigger than the first one, and it will probably only be 2 tenants as well. Okay. But let's say probably, because there's only 1 living room. So using common sense, we're not going to cram in 3 participants and wheelchairs in a house. We only want 1 living area.
Yes.
And this is in class 3 now with the fire sprinklers. So size is a much bigger house over here, and 270 square meters versus 205 square meter. They're both probably going to end up with 2 participants each as well. Okay, probably. Does your valuation numbers change now? Because you talked about likely income.
Yes.
And cap rate and discounted vacancy. Well, they're both going to be two residents. They're both going to be the same vacancy. They're both going to be, but one's probably 70 to 90% more in costs, probably because it's a bigger house to build.
Yes.
So surely the size of a house does impact upon the valuation because its cost to build is there, and also the class 3 and the 5 sprinkler. So is there going to be much of a variance between the first one and the second one I just mentioned here?
With what we're seeing in the market is, and speaking to providers, if we're looking at a property that's got potential for 3 participants and a carer as opposed to 2 participants and a carer, the demand or the number of participants that want to be in a 3-person house is probably a little bit less than what it might be for a 2.
Correct.
So we're seeing a greater or a higher vacancy rate for properties that have 3 participants as opposed to 2.
Vacancy rate on the 3rd bedroom. Yes.
Yeah. Or we look at it overall. So the 3rd bedroom could be vacant for potentially
Yeah. Yep.
if you average it out. True. In your example that you've given, the rental would be slightly higher for a property with fire sprinklers based on the NDIS.
Only by 2-3 grand, yes.
So not very much. We would look at it from 2 perspectives. We'd look at it as 2 participants with that slightly higher rental, which then if you average it all back, it's probably only going to be marginally higher in price than the 2-participant house.
Mm-hmm.
We'd also look at it from a realistic, probably a 3-participant and apply that higher vacancy factor.
Mm-hmm.
But what we're seeing is that the difference between a 2-participant house and a 3-participant house in terms of the end value isn't much different. So there's not a great deal of added value by building a 3-participant house as opposed to a 2.
Yep, agreed.
So most of the products that we're seeing out there are generally a 2-participant plus an overnight carer, which is effectively a 3-bedroom, 3.5-room home. So,
which is where the industry is leading towards as well. Yeah.
that's my understanding from trying to find the optimum number of participants for the home, for the cost of the home as well.
Yeah, maybe, the question, I guess, at its heart is how do you establish the value of 2 products which produce the same income but are clearly not worth the same from the perspective of any rational human being, right? So now one example that you gave me is what if the house was 60 square meters bigger and had perhaps a second living area? Doesn't generate an income per se, however, clearly has additional cost, clearly would have a higher alternative use valuation. All of these things would play out. And probably the assumption would be that it would have a lower vacancy rate because it's a higher quality product, but not necessarily. And another example would be, as we discussed earlier, is the location categories that are provided by the NDIA are not grainy enough to properly reflect land values. So to think that a property that's, say, in Jundana or Mount Lawley would have the same rental yield as a property that's in Nollamara or Westminster or Balga, and those two having the same land size, the same construction, the same income, it doesn't even compute that they should be worth the same. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. And in that situation, your return might be slightly lower for the properties in Mount Lawley or we're not, if that was the example, because of the higher underlying land value. But I would expect that you probably wouldn't see the same product being built in the 2 locations because you're not going to get the return.
For sure.
A lot of the valuations that we're doing on the NDIS properties are probably in locations where the land is a bit cheaper.
Yeah. And for that reason, exactly. Because the way the incentives have been set up, possibly inadvertently, is that's where they make economical sense.
Correct.
Next question. Cap rates, vacancy. Did we discuss that already so far? And
We touched on it.
do you want to go more detailed?
Yeah, I think maybe just a quick summary. So, Matt, what you've outlined is that what you're seeing the transactions in the market happen at is about a 9 to 10% net return. Net, just for clarification, means less of all costs and reduces the property amount or the gross income by a vacancy rate. In the case that I think what you mentioned, the typical vacancy of these should be around 10 to 15% for a 2-bedroom product and as much as 30% for a 3-bedroom product.
Correct.
Have I summarized that?
Yeah, that's about right. So the return on your net rental would be what we're seeing is between 9 and 10%. And we've generally applied a vacancy maintenance factor between 10 and 15% for a 2-participant dwelling to have as high as 30% for a 3-participant dwelling. Because as we discussed, there's less demand for homes with 3 participants, and therefore we would envisage a higher vacancy. In saying that, there's not a lot of data out there at the moment. As I said, it's a very new product for WA, and it is a specialised product. And the information on vacancies and rental incomes and even sales of NDIS properties isn't really recorded, even through Landgate recordings. We can't distinguish if the property is an NDIS or a conventional home. So the only way that we get our data is by talking to builders, providers, and people that are selling the product, and obviously the valuations that we do.
Before we did the podcast earlier, started the podcast, we talked about discount rates of one-line buyers, one-line approach. Do you want to ask that question again?
Yeah, sure. So if anyone who's interested in doing developments in this space, which I think is obviously a hot topic at the moment as well, valuing a development side or a property development, especially when there's 2 or 3 dwellings that will be constructed on one title, is quite different to valuing a product on completion. The question that I guess that will have you answer, Matt, is how do you, if I wanted to purchase a site and build 4 villas, SDA villas, how would you approach that, and what sort of residual value would you give to the land, and how would you value the end products, and how does that valuation look compared to a traditional development?
Sure. So in all developments, the financiers generally want to know 3 things. They want to know the land value, they want to know the gross realisation of the values of the products once they're constructed, and quite often they want to know this in one line value. So basically, the in one line value is what a investor could afford to come in and pay for the product once construction is complete and they're ready for titles to be issued, to either keep the product for investment or to sell them off individually. So that's the sort of background to the in one line value. The way we go about producing the in one line value is we assess the value of each individual villa, assuming that an individual certificate of title is issued. So that might be if it's an NDIS, let's say the $850,000. And then what we do is go through a hypothetical development approach. So we work from the end product and we work back to what a developer could afford to pay for the land based on going through that development process. So you've got the 4, from your example, the 4 villa values based on the NDIS value. Each of those are going to attract a GST component because newly created lots attract a GST. There's going to be selling and marketing costs, assuming that the developer will sell them off individually. There'll be a profit and risk margin. Now, the profit and risk margin is going to be less than what it would be for working out the profit and the risk for the building developer, because we're assuming that the building was already completed. But there's still a risk that you may not achieve the prices that you've adopted, the end value prices. It may take longer to sell, which will increase your holding costs and things like that. So there is, and no one's going to do it for no profit. They won't, if they don't go through this process, they'll want to make some money. So we take off the GST, selling marketing costs, a profit and risk margin, which could be sort of around the 10 to 12%. And then we deduct if there's any other costs to get the titles issued. And then there's holding costs over the selling period. So you might sell one of the units off the plan, and then you'll have 3 remaining units left, which you might sell 1 per month. So there's going to be interest over that holding period while you sell the remaining 3 dwellings. And then there's going to be taxes and stamp duty and legal fees. So what we do is we revert back to a residual development value. So what someone could afford to pay for the 4 villas once they're all completed to go through the process and hypothetically sell them off. Does that give you?
Yep. Wonderful. Wonderful. Matt, so before we finish off, what have you seen out there in the marketplace in Perth for NDIS stock product coming out that work and does work in your view?
Well, I think as we touched on earlier, the 2-participant product is probably more efficient from a financial point of view. And a lot of these properties are being built on 350 to 450 square metre lots. They often just have a single garage. There's often an overnight carers facility. Now, some of the products we see, there's no third bathroom for the overnight carer. Now, I think that would be important to have that for the carer too.
Do you make that, well, obviously it is a missing bathroom for the carer. Is that a negative impact on the valuation?
Look, I think that might have a reflection on the yield that we are doing. So we might have a slightly higher yield. So we would recommend to developers to have a bathroom or third bathroom for the carer, or at a minimum have it as a combined bathroom laundry. And so if the carer needs to wash off or whatever,
They've got a spare.
rather than going into a participant's bathroom.
Yeah.
So that sort of thing is we look at. We also recommend to the developers that if they can configure the layout of the dwelling in a way that it could be converted back to more of a conventional design, then that's probably going to be beneficial potentially down the track when if the NDIS product is no longer viable in that location, and they can feasibly convert back to an alternative use.
If anyone's wondering what the cost is going to be for that, we've had that question asked many times, and our builders in Brisbane have said about 10 to 15 grand to put it back to what it was, as in a non-NDIS product. So the retrofit back to about 10 to 15 those numbers, yeah.
Okay. And that may differ if you constructed more of a lightweight construction or have non-load bearing walls. Those sort of things probably should be considered when they're designing that as an alternative use.
Yeah, and I guess just as a couple of closing remarks, Matt, I just want to say, thank you so much for sharing your experience with us. For people, if you're interested in the space, it's what valuers do. This whole industry could not have got off the ground without guys like you actually taking the time to learn and think about the product. I don't think very many people understand just how much risk a valuer takes when they put a number on a development, and especially when there just isn't any data and no one's patting you on the back for actually taking the time. So anecdotally, we really struggled with valuers who didn't understand the product, and they were valuing it essentially the same way as an alternative use and not understanding why there's $200,000 of extra build costs in these things. And the lack of valuation, understanding was a major barrier for us to get product into the ground, which obviously means that people who have the need and the disability funding, they don't have the place to live. And so I just want to say, firstly, thank you for being one of the few valuers who's taken the time to truly understand the product. And maybe if you could just tell us, how do people connect with you and how do they direct funders and lenders to consider your organization, which is one of the most reputable valuation organizations? You're already on the panel for many lenders, so it's an easy way to get you to actually to engage with you. How do people connect with you?
Yeah, so like I said earlier, we've been involved with specialised property valuations for a number of years, quite a few years, and you've got to sit back and look at, well, what's someone willing to pay for the property? And if there is no evidence for this, you've got to say, well, if I was buying an alternative property with a similar amount of risk, what's the market paying for those? And as I think I touched on before, we looked at medical centres and childcare centres and look at what sort of returns they're achieving and other specialised property types, and apply that similar methodology to this approach. And then as we've had time over the last 12 to 18 months, we've now got some data which we can rely on to say, well, this is evidence of what the market's willing to pay. So it's getting easier for us as a valuer because we've got more justification of the value that we're adopting. But it was a little bit difficult in the earlier stages. So we've you can contact us on our website at garmony.com.au. But many of the lenders in the NDIS space quite often use us for their valuations. So I've got an affiliate company in over east called Civic NJD Australia, who we get a lot of the instructions through from them. So either Garmony Property Consultants or Civic MJD Australia.
Matt, one last question. What is the worst valuation you've given for an SDA house? And look, I won't ask for the address or the location, just what's the worst number? What's the price, you reckon?
What do you define worst valuation?
Valuation shortfall.
So what's the, how much does it short?
What was the biggest shortfall you ever gave for an NDIS house?
I don't think they've been that high. I think maybe £50,000 or something like that. From the onset, we've tried to sort of step back and look at the rental income, and that's what people are buying these properties for. They're buying it for the rental income and the return.
Yeah,
I think we started out with a return close to the 10 to 11%, but as the market matures and the returns are reducing down to 9 to 10%, most of the returns are probably in that 9 to 9.5% on the most recent valuations.
So 50K is your worst valuation shortfall. Do you do many on the dollar valuation?
I think we've had some that have come in higher.
Oh, okay. Wow, okay.
Wow.
Not much, but
why would you do that?
Well, if you look at from the rental income approach and capitalise it at that sort of return, whether the building product may have
been price wrong,
might have been priced wrong. Okay.
Oh, it's a good deal.
Yeah.
So how do we get more of that?
I know that's great.
Wonderful, mate. Thank you so much for your time, Matt. Do you get many investors come to you directly for a private valuation on a proposed product they may consider buying? This is nothing to do with lending. Just like, hi, I'm a client. I want to buy this apartment that's built, NDIS. I want to do a private valuation with you. Can I do that with you?
Yeah, we do valuations for a wide variety of purposes, which might be for pre-purchase.
Yep.
Could be for stamp duty and transfer purposes if they're transferring between, let's say, a family trust and a superannuation fund.
Yep.
We do feasibility studies. So if developers want to get an idea of whether it's worthwhile going through the process based on some construction costs that they've got, we can do a feasibility analysis similar to what we would do for the banks.
Yes.
So we don't just concentrate on finance mortgage value.
So if a mum and dad wanted to buy a house on land NDIS package, they came to you to do a feasibility. What would the cost for the feasibility be?
Look, assessing an NDIS property is more complicated than a straightforward residential house. You're probably looking in around about the $2,500.
Okay, nice. And if it was a project like 10 units?
10 units, there's probably a discount on that. It wouldn't be $25,000, but if we work it out on time and what it would take to do that, possibly an amount for risk. So,
that's good.
We might closer to the $10,000 mark.
Cool, gotcha. Any final words of advice?
Get good advice when you're purchasing investment properties. Now, that might be financial advice, and it can also be valuation advice.
I think get good, realistic advice. It's
correct.
Yeah. Angad, any final words from you?
No, I think that's it from me, mate. Thank you very much.
I think it's great for our listeners to actually be able to hear from the horse's mouth what goes on in his head, right? And if anyone wants to contact Matt, just go to www.garmony.com.au. Matt, what's your office phone number?
9474 220.
What the Perth number is?
08.
Yeah, 089474 2220. Wonderful. Matt, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks very much, man.
Thanks, very.
Cheers.
We hope you enjoyed this episode. Please make sure you are subscribed and following us so you can keep in the loop with all of our upcoming episodes. We would really appreciate it if you could leave us a 5-star rating, a written review, and to share this podcast with those that could benefit. Until next time, catch you on the next episode.